So,
the question is about perception, and I perceive it to be a real ill in our community, an illness that we all sort of have, especially if you've been born and raised here. The anti-blackness, the racism, yeah.
how do you think the media portrays violence in New Orleans, and how does this portrayal align with your own experience and observation?
I believe the media feeds us propaganda about the violence here in New Orleans, and it always pisses me off. And I live in the 7th Ward. You know, if you saw the news every day, you'd swear I lived in a war zone. And that's just not true. That is not my lived experience, and it's certainly not the lived experience of all my neighbors. That's not to say violence is not present in my neighborhood, but I think it's unfair because there's just as much violence up in the North Shore, but you don't see the news being covered with violence that's happening on the North Shore. You only see news covering the violence in like my neighborhood, in this neighborhood, and affecting mostly Black and brown people. So for me, it's all propaganda, and not actual factual.
So you say that it creates a stereotype?
Absolutely. Yeah, it supports all of the isms that exist, especially the anti-blackness in our community and the racism that we see every day.
Okay. Have you or anyone you know been involved in efforts to prevent or respond to violence in the community, like through advocacy, activism?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm part of a bunch of different groups that I've worked with in the past and currently. I believe that all the work that I've done, especially in community, even though we're not maybe directly talking about affecting increases in violence, what we're working on, at least for me, has always sort of with the intent that hopefully it affects some of those issues or problems that cause the violence. So for example, the comic book, which is why I'm here today, us creating this form of artivism, of using art and activism in the form of a comic book to be able to speak about heavy and difficult issues that affect New Orleans, because the comic book is New Orleans specific, is for me a tool, is a way of being able to speak about these things, expand ideas, and to overcome the violence in some ways, especially because we're focusing on reaching Trinity City to young people, because it's written by young people, it's written for young people, because I'll be gone one day and y'all are still going to be dealing with the violence. And so I would like to be able to do something in my days today that helps to decrease that. So when you're my age, it's not as violent anymore as it is today.
Okay, so doing what you do, have you seen like change happening?
Yes, I have. As someone who was born and raised here, you know, people make a lot of correlations about the violence now with the violence in the 80s and the 90s. And mind you, I was a young teenager when those things were happening. And I wasn't living in those neighborhoods. I wasn't directly affected. But I watched the news and I lived in community. And the violence back in those years was so much worse. Like, so much worse. In fact, I am convinced we don't even know half of it. Because I truly believe Black community in New Orleans weren't going to tell us all of what was happening to them. They had no one to tell. And so I believe we don't even know the full story. And nobody's really bothering to document the violence and the changes in community that happened back in the 80s and the 90s. So if you compare it to today, it is different. That's not to say the violence today isn't bad. It is better in the sense that we're having conversations that nobody was having back then, or very few people were having. And now I feel like most of us are having it. Like someone like me maybe would never have been having those conversations at my age back in the 80s and 90s. But I'm having those conversations today. I think that is a testament of change and improvement. And hopefully that will continue.
So do you think trauma and violence is deeply correlated?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of what we do in every day of our lives is a response to traumas that we've had to overcome and that we're still trying to process and overcome. Everything from our toxicity in our relationships with our own family and the way that we engage in community and the way that we react, or if we actually do violence.
Okay. What role do you think system factors such as poverty, education, or access to health care play in shaping the experiences of violence in New Orleans?
Read it one more time.
What role do you think
violence we're seeing today, like we were talking a few seconds ago, are responses to trauma, which are responses to mental health issues that we could, as a community, address if we were providing health care to all of our citizens in a way that's equitable. We're not. Same thing with education. I think that one of the ways that we can process trauma and process what we're not able to just accept, because as humans we can't accept just horrible violence, is by educating, it's by reading, it's by exploring art, it's about learning about each other's humanities. All those things are huge roles. And what was the third one? Education, healthcare, and
Poverty.
poverty. Well, that was my first core issue, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when people can't meet their basic